quarterback throws an interception. I mean, those are the things that I think makes fantasy really interactive. So that's where I see one thing of where it's going. The idea of a podcast, obviously, the fact that you're doing this is great because most, podcasting is kind of one of the niches that fantasy sports has found, but not a lot of leagues do that.
Right.
That is definitely unique.
Great. Well, the Dynasty certainly is unique, and but no, that's fast. That's great stuff, Professor. Another question I have for you. An ongoing debate which we constantly have within our league is kind of how much luck and fate and matchups is involved within everyone's fantasy success. We actually refer to the kind of luck as fantasy gods. So I found that there's really a small minority of people that I know of that don't believe in fantasy gods at all. Whereas most fantasy players that I know believe that the fantasy gods control at least some, if not most, of fantasy players' success. Professor, what is your opinion? What would you say as far as what percentage do you think kind of luck and fate and matchups kind of factor into everyone's fantasy football success?
That is a great question. That's $1 million question right there. And I think depending on who you talk to, you'll get a different answer. But my personal opinion, and from what I've found from talking and doing research with individuals related to fantasy football, because I think it is different between sports. I think baseball and football are completely different. But for football, and once again, this is using a standard league. If you have a standard league where there's no keepers, there's no dynasties, there's no real, I guess,
long
year
term
after year.
Yeah.
You don't make a move that's going to affect you years down the road. I think the luck is about 65% luck, 35% skill. And I think that's just because you don't know player performance, weather, injuries. Those are so unpredictable. And I think for a standard league where all the best players are being used, but that's about it. You're not using. You don't really have to get into the numbers, get into the opportunity, get into the skill of players that are kind of on the fringe. So, I think I'm a big proponent. The more skill areas you can add by doing that, so adding more players to a roster, I think is important. Having a league where players are kept for years, I think those types of things make it more skillful. But in the general standard league, I would say 65-35 luck. And that's one of the things that kind of scares me about, the growth of fantasy football is that people are starting to figure that out, and they're starting to get upset that, it's really coming down to, how your kicker did or how many interceptions the quarterback playing against your defense did, as opposed to some of the decisions you make on a week-to-week basis.
Right.
People in general want to see their decisions dictate wins and losses. So I think another growth area for fantasy football is going to see the skill components come out. More dynasty leagues, more keeper leagues, bigger rosters. I think that's a big growth area.
Very interesting. And within our league, we do have one keeper player. You can't keep them for more than 1 year, but we do at least have that. We do also have draft pick trading as well, so you can trade for future draft picks, whether it be next year or 2 years down the line. We've seen that as well. So I agree with you. I actually thought it was maybe around 70 to 75%, but hearing your explanation behind it, and then kind of with the reasonings behind it, as you said, everyone has a different opinion. I'm sure everyone has experienced certain amounts of luck and certain amounts of their skill paying off in some fashion. So excellent stuff, Professor. I definitely really appreciate your time. Again, his name is Professor Brendan Dwyer, and you can check out more about sports leadership at www.sportsleadership.vcu.edu. And Professor, again, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Hey, no problem. Anytime.
Thank you.
That was this week's Dynasty Podcast Interactive Segment.
Good stuff. I like it. Professor, I told you, Zach, Brendan, and thank you for being nice and quiet during the interview. that Professor Brandon Dwyer, he has some good stuff to say, and I knew he'd be kind of down to earth, and the Step Brothers reference, good stuff, and so he thinks the fantasy gods factor in about 65%, which is interesting. It's kind of right around where I thought. Zach, what do you think? Do you think it's right around the same or less than? I think Bub thinks like 30%. What do you think?
I think it's around 50-50.
Okay.
And if that's the case, I think VIP is going to get his this week for taking Pierre Garçon.
Oh, so that's right.
I think you're going to see a yellow apparel victory this week.
I don't know how we went this long in the podcast without mentioning the Pierre Garçon incident.
By the way, he still has a chance to get to 750.
What does he need, like 400 yards?
He needs 303 games.
Oh, yeah, sorry, the whole regular season, not the fantasy regular season.
Correct.
That could happen. Well, anyway, that is going to wrap up episode number 15 of the Tom Berkowitz Trucking Dynasty podcast. I would like to thank Tom Berkowitz Trucking, as always. I'd like to thank Coach Bub Polucha for joining us earlier. I would like to thank Professor Brandon Dwyer. I'd like to thank you, Zach, for filling in once again, and I'd like to thank all you dirtbags for listening.
Even though it's blatantly obvious who this season's most disappointing team was, start thinking about who your vote will be for most disappointing team and most improved team.
And unless your name is Ben Green, good luck to everyone in the final week 15. This is your perfect commissioner approval rank. Commissioner goddamn Eric Costanza, otherwise known as Scooper.
And this is Handy Cracks, Zach Polucha.
Over and out, bitches.
Hi, I'm Todd Watson, athletic director and head football coach at Foley High School in Foley, Alabama, and former coach of Atlanta Falcons wide receiver Julio Jones. This episode of the Dynasty Podcast is brought to you by Tom Berkowitz Trucking. Call 508-234-2920 and become a customer today.